Hi all, on Play Chess and streaming to YouTube. Okay, so there's a very interesting high level tournament being played at the moment. The Tata still being played in the Netherlands, the Wijk on Zee tournament. And of course I've been looking at one or two of the more notable games on the YouTube channel already, but there's others I haven't checked out, and maybe we can catch up on two that I haven't checked out. One just been played, actually hot off the press today, a very interesting encounter. Wei Yi 2706 against David Navara 2730. So today was round 9. So let's see what happened. I think it's a very interesting game. So we're in for a treat here to have a look at this. Let's add a default Kb1, just in case things get heavy tactically, which I think they will. So Wei Yi has, up until this today, just drawn all his games rather solidly actually. Even you know, Michael Adams, a super grandmaster, has lost quite a few already, but Wei Yi kept solid, didn't lose a single game. So did he lose today? Hope some of you, or many of you, haven't seen this game already. So Wei Yi kicks off against David Navara with e4, and we have e5. No surprise here. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, royal of pairs, and popular over the ages is a6, but also knight f6 is the second most popular move. So Berlin defense. Now here, overtime castling is very popular on knight c3, but there's also a third alternative in Livebook, which is d3. It has certain ideas, of course. It looks like kind of a modest move, but it's pretty solid. It encourages black to activate the bishop quite aggressively, and that's the main move, bishop c5, which David Navara played. And quite often here it seems c3 is the most popular, or castling, but there's a forcing move available to white. Third most popular, bishop takes c6, damaging black's pawn structure, and usually black's playing with d takes c6 here. Okay, that means that there's a tactic here that the pawn cannot be taken because queen d4. That would be a disaster. So knight bd2. Now black castled, so well trodden position, well known position, and usually knight c4 is played here, which it is now. Eyeing e5, knight d7, and okay, now quite often white just castles here. This is very interesting actually. This is the main move. This is interesting now at move 8. As a sample of the flavour of the games, and I'm saying there's 60 games in Livebook with castling. In the game actually here, queen e2 was played. But let's get a flavour if white castles. Black might support the e5 pawn. Bishop d2 trying to maybe put more pressure on e5. Black trying to reinforce e5. We have sort of extended arm wrestling. You know, it's like an arm wrestling metaphor. Both sides trying to put more and more pressure on this central square. Black locking down d4. This, you know, there's been games from here. That's how it would go. And white's looking forward to, you know, maybe a positional grind of some sort. Maybe later using the light squares. That's a sample of how most games tend to go, right? White tends to just castle in this position. So it's very interesting actually, because bishop e3 has been played rarely, h3 rarely, and this is super rare. There's only 4 games with what was played, queen e2. And yes, queen e2, white has not said he's going to castle kingside with this move. In fact, queen e2 says something else. It says that white might even be trying to castle queenside. And as many of us know, when the two players castle on opposite sides of the board, it livens up my commentary. I get excited, and so do some of you maybe sometimes. I find a lot of the castling opposite side games, yes, very, very exciting. And here Queen E2 sets the tone for the rest of the game, because we have Rook E8, Bishop D2, yes, the options castle queenside. Is there anything really black can do to prevent it? Black could try a forcing move, but what will it do? What would it achieve to kick the knight? Black actually played Bishop D6 here. It's actually an engine suggestion. Let's check this. The knight can drop back, or A5. And I think White would have extra targets. White might not necessarily castle queenside here. It might just castle kingside and play A4. When you do this, you do give that target lever. Okay, so David Navara wasn't tempted for that forcing move. He just played Bishop D6. So reinforcing E5, and that also means the C pawn can be used to lock down D4, which may later mean B5 and stuff. But here, yeah, an ultra aggressive move. Instead of castling here, we have H4. And for the moment, Black hasn't got the defensive knight yet on F6. But Black locks down that D4 square. And now H5. And actually there might be an idea of simply going to H6 to try and weaken some dark squares around the king. Okay, what should Black really do in this position? Well, Black locked down White's H6 by playing H6 himself. And now we have castling queenside. So this is quite an exciting position if you consider the opening was the dreaded Berlin defense. But how on earth does White open up lines here? White would probably want to play, if White had a few extra moves, White would play like G4, G5 and tear open the G file, you'd think. So Black's actual next move seems to at least address G4. It stops G4 by retreating the knight like this. The knight can also then reroute to the center maybe, and the bishop is stopping at the moment the move G4. So one question is, can we actually play G4 as a pawn sacrifice? It wasn't actually. Rook Dg1 was played, and if we played G4 as a pawn sac, maybe F6, and then what? Well, that's an interesting position anyway, this position, because maybe White could maneuver into the light squares. I think it will be. It looks too dangerous to take here. This looks far too dangerous. This would be losing, I think, immediately for Black, nearly immediately. This position, there's just too much pressure. You don't want to take a pawn with your king on the receiving end of that motorway. No, it's too much. This is just going to be a massacre. Here's an example. It's just going to be a massacre. And end of game. So no. But anyway, so yeah, G4, although it seems quite dangerous, it wasn't played. It does seem quite dangerous, and it might have prompted, basically it might have prompted F6. That would be the more realistic thing for Black to do. Nevertheless, okay, we see Rook Dg1. And for me, this begged the question here about Black trying to maybe delay the move G4 from White. Black actually played a more positional approach. It seems, well, not so worried about king safety. He plays knight C6, as though the knight's going to come to D4 or something. And G4 was actually permitted. But one question I have, what about Bishop G4? Let's just answer this. Okay, in this particular position, this bishop could be evicted, it seems. Knight E3. And the bishop's just going back. I can't really take there because protected, can't really be protected, and if the queen does that, actually there's a tactical idea. Knight takes e5 here. It could be a tactical liability on g4. This ends up being better for white, this position. So okay, bishop g4. Yeah, knight e3 would be the answer. The knight's ready to come to e3. Whoops. So anyway, knight c6 was played. And now we do have that aggressive move g4 and the stubborn defensive move f6, trying to avoid getting the g file opened up, f6. So here is the interesting point, an interesting point in the game. Or could it be argued this is a mega interesting point of the game? Attacking players all around the world watching this position and thinking the attacking player needs the open lines. How do we get the open lines here? Isn't black just stopping any opening of the G file? Of course we want to open up this G file. Black's also got a good central grip. How do we do this? Interesting. How? So guess what white plays in this position? It does seem rather radical. So white play. So if I give you 20 seconds on stream because there's a delay, what would you play with white? I hope you haven't seen this game before. So this is Wei Yi against David Navara. Just played today. It's hot off the press. It's a game hot off the press. What would you play with white? Okay, on play chess, yes, someone's mentioned a move and someone's mentioned the same move on stream. Okay, yeah, it seems, you know, intuitively we've got to open up that G file, right? If we don't open up the G file, I mean, you might have considered knight h4. I'm not sure this has enough punch to it to go into the light squares. This would be a calm sort of way of approaching things, but what happens around about here? Black, you know, has a good grip on things, it seems, in this position, or good enough. No, so the more radical thing was actually g5. Forcibly opening up lines. F takes g5, and now white, in a Tau-like fashion, sacrificing a knight, keeping the dangerous bishop. Could white have sacrificed the bishop? You might ask. Is this interchangeable, this piece sack on g5? Let's have a quick look. Bishop takes g5. This is actually reasonably dangerous for black, but it seems black might be okay, fairly okay. Possibly queen f6, possibly. And although it gets very scary, maybe it's not interesting enough, this position. So yeah, it seems the engine approves that the way to sacrifice a piece here is actually the knight. Play the knight sack instead. And one question, of course, is the knight has neglected d4, so why can't black actually get a useful tempo gain, a central move with tempo? You'd think is a good idea, and that was actually what was played here. Knight d4. Although, is it improving the queen? You can't simply say this is a good move because it's forcing moving it central. If it actually improves the queen at all, it might not be worth playing. Maybe black should be open-minded enough to, you know, to consider like b5, as well as of course the hg. But what is happening on the hg? Well, hg here immediately instead of knight d4 is interesting. Bishop takes g5, bishop e7 takes. There's a difference here from the other piece sack line. It seems black has got less defensive resources than the other line we looked at, and is actually getting blasted out of the board after this move. Black's getting blasted. there's only the bishop holding the king, and after knight e3, yeah, things get nasty. This would start to get really nasty for black, this kind of continuation. And I think also there's classic ideas that if black ever tries this, there's a classic idea here. Yeah, queen g7 check. When you have two rooks like this is a classic tactic pattern to look out for. And here it's in this line, I'm just showing this fantasy line. This is working well for white, crashing through. So anyway, yeah, if we just go back, we've gone a bit far there, yeah. So knight takes g5, it's probably asking for it to play h takes g. We get the gist, it's asking for it. So knight d4 was played, queen d1, but actually it was played now. Is there a big difference then with the central knight? Is this knight going to somehow save the black king? Okay, so we have bishop takes g5, bishop e7. Now, in the line I just shown you, the computer generated line, bishop takes e7, yeah, with the knight on c6. It's interesting to compare positions actually. Does bishop takes e7 work at all well here? Let's have a quick look. Bishop takes e7. It works pretty well actually. Queen takes e7. I think this is also dangerous for white. h6 for the similar sort of reasons. Similar reasons, although maybe there's something wrong here. g4. It seems actually it's slightly different, this position, to the other one we've seen. But even here, you know, it's dangerous. Rook h5. It seems quite dangerous. This is dangerous for black. But okay, but no, it seems as though Wei Yi played one of the strongest moves in this position. You might think he'll be very, very keen to take on e7 followed by h6. It does seem like a logical thing to do. I mean, it did seem to do the trick in the other line very well, just showing. But actually he retreated the bishop to e3. So why would this have more venom than taking on e7? Well, white still has in reserve h6 and also is going to kick this knight. Let's see, the bishop is given a chance to try and do something defensively though. Bishop f6. We have h6. So white is actually, if white had another two moves, he'd play hg and rook h8, something like that. That would be nice. Okay, this is really quite dangerous. You might think g5 is out of the question here. It doesn't make sense anyway with the bishop move. If g5 here, let's have a quick look. White can actually, it seems, play bishop takes, f4, and if takes queen h5, and white's crashing through here. White's going to have things like queen g6. This looks like extremely dangerous, and if stuff like this, then we can even take here. And the knight not being on c6, that difference, it's not holding the e5 square, so you get patterns like this emerging. h7 is crushing. There's also a disconnection issue here, an underlying disconnection issue. So the back row is actually weak. So that's a disaster scenario for black. If the queen moves, then we have the check on the back row. Okay, so g5's like kind of ruled out here, it seems. Anyway, the bishop wants to just defend g7. So the idea instead, black's defensive policy is just to defend that g7 pawn, not move it forward. That seems very cautious and sensible. So rook e7, both of these pieces struggling to defend g7. Okay, but now we have h takes g7, with the immediate threat of rook h8 check winning the queen. So there's two defensive ideas, or at least bishop takes g7 would seem worth considering at least, or rook takes g7. In the game we see rook takes g7. On bishop takes g7, queen h5, and it's a kind of pin piece, and it's subject here to queen h8 check and just taking the bishop after. That's too dangerous. This is actually pretty terminal for black, this position. If we imagine this, kick the knight, if the knight goes back, this will be pretty terminal stuff. In fact, the attack can continue like this, another pin piece. No, so rook takes g7 was played, which might be the strongest defensive try, but it's looking a bit bleak here because these pieces are not really involved in king safety. Okay, so at the moment, check and taking, and something horrible like winning the queen is happening after that because the bishop's protecting the queen. So that's the immediate threat in this position if it's not parried. Just to clearly show that. Right, say black did a totally irrelevant move, a5. I just want to quickly show you what I've just said. Check, we're on the queen. Rook takes g7 as a tactic, not to mate, but to actually win black's queen. So that has to be addressed here. So black played bishop e6 in this position. And it is very tempting to still play this check, if that's any good. It might be one of the strongest moves, it seems, but this is a strong position for white anyway. There's other strong ideas. Just taking this pawn could be a strong idea. There's various, but I think Wei Yi found a very, very strong idea as well. He played bishop h6. This is at move 23, bishop h6. Okay, so what's the main threat? Well, it's bishop takes g7, and then we're going to have things like queen at h8 check and winning the bishop again. Yeah, it's really scary. Okay, so black tries bishop f7, but there's a slight issue with bishop f7. Can you see what white can play? White play here. What would you play with white? Yeah, the queen's attacked, but you can ignore that. The position is so strong for white. So I hope you've kind of thought about this, not moving the queen. If you did move the queen, well, the knight's holding these squares, right? So there's not too many places to move the queen. If you did move the queen somewhere like here, then black's actually like winning, like check, and rook takes g1 check is actually winning for black. Yeah, this will be end of game. White's busted there. No, it's all in. Got to be very precise here. And if the queen, okay, the queen could get away with going to d1 though, it seems, with still a reasonable position. Actually, that's something maybe to emphasize as well, because I was looking at another game from this tournament earlier, this Magnus Carlsen game, and I happened to see Magnus Carlsen's commentary after doing the video, and he said that about not having to accept a piece, that he had a good position anyway. So it's important to consider actually that technically the position is still good for white. He's not forced to do something absolutely amazing. He could play queen d1 with a good position here, it seems. Queen d1, so he's still like take here. This carries different ideas, to take here on g7 and then use the pin in a different way to just take the center pawn, and the attack might, you know, continue after that. But no, the very, very strongest move is bishop takes g7. So give yourself 100 points for bishop takes g7. So now clearly if bishop takes g7, then it's checkmate using the pin piece. So black is really having to take the queen, but now we have bishop takes f6 check. Yeah, this is a race to win as much material as possible now for both sides. king f8, bishop takes d8. So what's happening here? White's material up at the moment, a rook up in this position. Black has this check and takes a rook. So in this position, what should white do in this position? Well, it's the last move of the game. I'm just going to tell you actually. If white took on h5, then even this position is strong for white. But you know, even stronger just taking here. Yeah, and black resigns in this position because he's going to be winning more material. Yeah, the bishop, if it goes back, then we just take on g1. You might think also there's this idea of the rook h8 check, which you'd be right. If bishop g6, then rook h8 check becomes stronger than taking the knight. But yeah, if bishop f7 here, actually bishop d6 might be the strongest. Let's take this pawn and torture black a bit more before taking the knight. So anyway, yeah, so what we saw was really I thought this game actually dispels the illusion that that we might have as a community, that this Berlin defense, you can't just play like a caveman against the Berlin defense. This is a caveman style win against the Berlin defense with a rare, relatively infrequent, you know, the d3 move. But what was really special was the queen e2 move. White simply having you know, a primitive idea, you know, to castle queenside and just smash black, you know, with the g file. Why not? It's like you know, pretty direct stuff. I don't know what you think. I thought that was a pretty direct game, as far as direct games go, against what, you know, is supposedly one of the most solid, boring, tedious openings in the history of chess, the Berlin defense. You know, it was just smashed up. So isn't that great? Isn't that great news for the attacking players? I think it is. Don't you? Brilliant game. So it'll encourage maybe some players to play more interesting openings with black. Yeah, this is but I'm sure it's going to be studied for the defensive tries and resources. Yeah. So, but in this particular game, white smashed through on the king side. So I thought that was one interesting, notable game. And it was actually prompted on the channel to cover this game at some point. So I thought, why not tonight? Should black castle in the opening? Do you want to have a quick look? Should black have castled on the king side? That's an interesting question. Black committed to castling. Maybe that was a mistake. But if we go back here, you're right, black, you know, didn't have to castle king side. You could have probably played a bit more sneakily. Bishop e6 as an engine choice. Waiting for white to castle. If white waits around like this, then that's a clue that white's not going to castle, and black could wait around like this. And the game's kind of different already. You know, black could even consider taking her and stopping white castling queen. It's a different game. You get a massively different game. Yeah, but I think basically this is such an innovation. You know, this is the world trodden move. Castling here is the most popular move in live, but actually bishop e6 is the second most popular, to be fair. So maybe people looking at this game might think bishop e6. There's 60 games actually in live book for bishop e6 and 66 for castling. Knight d7 37. So maybe bishop e6 is a potential, becomes rather a more potentially important candidate move. So yeah, this is interesting, this position here. All right, shall we have a look at another game? Which I thought was also kind of interesting from an earlier round. So from an earlier round, there's a Caruana game. I don't know if you, how many of you have seen the Caruana game. So our victim in this game is also featured in this game as white though. So David Navara against Fabiano Caruana. Let's have a look at this game. Okay. So d4, David Navara, and Caruana plays knight f6. We have c4 e6. We go into Nimzo Indian. Queen c2. I think this is like one of the more popular moves, and I think it's ultimately became, I think, Kasparov's favourite move, Queen c2. You got the Rubinstein variation e3, but Queen c2 is second to that, it seems, in popularity. Castles, knight f3, c5, and white captures away from the centre here. Knight a6. Now this fianchetto. Knight takes c5, bishop g2. It's all well trodden stuff so far. Black damages white's pawn structure. e4, d6, e5, and this kind of opens up this diagonal and tries to show that black might have an issue with the c8 bishop. D takes, knight takes e5. So this bishop's a bit of a problem piece quite often, and here is no exception. We have queen c7, queen e2 defending that knight. So the structure versus white's extra kind of space and pressure at the moment. Knight d7, challenging the knight. Bishop f4, just supporting it. Knight takes, bishop takes. And you think black, with simplifying, would be keen, you know, because of this structure is a bit wretched here at the moment. The most common move here is bishop d6. That was played. Rook fe1. And this has all been seen before, actually. Even up to this point, it's all been seen before, up to move 17. This is a theoretical position. If you were a super grandmaster, you'd probably be aware of this position. Some STEM games, maybe. Yeah. So anyway, rook b8 was played here. So black really wants to kind of, you know, potentially blockade the structure and get his bishop out, maybe on b7 or even a6 later, to torture the c pawn. We have rook ad1, asking the bishop to move. Bishop takes, queen takes. But white's slight additional pressure means actually this isn't such a decisively lost issue at the moment, because look at black's bishop. So you've got a classic trade-off from the opening here at move 20, that white, you know, seems to have done something silly and reckless with his pawn structure, but look at the pieces, they're so active and aggressive here, and this passive bishop on c8. So David Navara is the one with the dynamic play in this position. So black plays b6, which, as I mentioned, you know, not just tries to block this, but also later. But white now dissolves his double pawns, still leaving, you know, fractured pawns here though, slightly. But black is not obliged to play b takes c5. Black kicks the rook first. And this is important, a very important position for white to play correctly. If white moves the rook, then black will be just winning this pawn, b takes c, not with great compensation for white here. This is not enough compensation, at least if white was trying for a win. Might be for a draw, but no, there's an amazing move played, well, it's kind of amazing move played in this position. So white hasn't actually fallen into some trap losing this pawn. He had an idea, I believe, up his sleeve here, which was, okay, so white to play here. What would you play in this position if I give you 20 seconds? What is possible here for white? What would you play with white? Alright, technical challenge time. What would you play with white? Yeah. Okay, well done. I'll say C takes B6 is important. So if black takes the rook, B takes A7, and actually we're getting our material back with interest here. Yeah, we're going to be queening, getting our rook back, and having a fun position. That's better for white. So yeah, black plays A takes B6. So white's at least succeeding in dissolving his double pawns, and still has this trump card of the extra piece activity, rook E2, which does prepare the idea that either rook B2 to put pressure on B6, or D2 maybe at some point. I think B6 is the main target though. King F7, F4 restricting E5. If black had played E5 here, I think this is almost possible actually. There's no big refutation there. So King F7, F4 trying to discourage E5. But tactically E5 is played anyway, because actually, horror of all horrors, bishop G4 to skewer the rook. Is this carelessness from white? So this is looking like, hold on a sec, has white really blundered here? If white tries to avoid the skewer, then you know, E takes F4 isn't so nice. This position, it seems as though there's fragmented pawns everywhere. So what to play here in the light of this skewer? Yeah, what does white play in this position? This is another technical challenge. What would you do in this position? Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. White play here. Okay, white play. What would you guys do? White play. 20 seconds. How do you solve this one? Do you deal with this threat? What do you do about this? Your rooks are about to be skewered. Panic. Do you panic? One suggestion, rook E4. Rook ED2. As I say, structural damage would result if E takes F4 is allowed. In fact, we see a very interesting F takes E5. So bishop G4 happens. E6 check. Trying to drag the bishop back. Now if the king goes here, then E7. And if takes, then check. And then if here, then this is winning for white, rook d8. Funny enough, because the rook's attacked, the pawn's holding the rook. Black can be a bishop up and still completely lost in this position. He's going to be losing that rook. He would have to take there and lose his rook. So that's a big pitfall to avoid. In fact, yeah. So the whole king E8 business, sorry, the whole king G8 business is a little bit scary because of E7. And if something like this, actually here is reasonable compensation, it seems, in this particular position. Because the rooks cannot win that pawn, and bishop F7 is threatened to win the exchange back. So anyway, this is all avoided by black playing the crafty looking king G6. So isn't black just gonna like get his exchange up? Not so easy. Check. The plot thickens. F5. Now, if king h6, I mean this is tempting, king h6. Actually, you know, black could get the exchange, but again, it's not entirely easy. Yeah, black played f5, which might be inferior actually technically to king h6. We have e7 now. Bishop takes. And maybe even better than taking, which would give black that pawn immediately, we have rook d6 check. So here, if king f7, then we can take there, and bishop takes f5. This is good for white. So actually, after this check, actually black chose king g5. So we have e takes with a rook apparently. Rook takes f8. Bishop d5. So yeah, after the dust has settled there, what has white achieved? It doesn't seem as though he's achieved much. But actually, you know, I think he has actually. White's slightly better now because he's got pressure on b6. He's exchanged off one pair of rooks in effect. The king looks potentially awkward. So the game continues. Rook f6. Rook d7. King h6. King comes up. Rook c7. Rook d6. c4. And here now, rook c8. Yeah, some positional play ensues. King centralizes. And again, going right into the center. Probing, restricting, probing, a4. Yeah, black is in a difficult position. That is a really aggressive king actually on e5. It's difficult for black, yeah. There's a continual threat here of rook a7 to pin that bishop as well. Black allowed that now with rook g6. The pin happens. Now, the idea actually wasn't bishop c8 on bishop c6, because here it seems, you know, rook d3 might be holding for black. No, in fact, stronger here, creating a dynamic new trump card in the position at move 50. Yes, a very, very exciting move here. So there's the obvious exploitation of the pin with bishop c6, or there's a less than obvious move in this position which actually guarantees white a decisive advantage in this position. A decisive advantage. White's play and win here. A bit of endgame finesse is needed and get a winning trump card, so we say. What would you play with white in this position? It is kind of related to the pin. It is kind of related to the pinned piece. Related. It's a tactic which has a logical relation to the pinned piece here. What would you play with white? David Navara is white. Yeah, just to keep saying, David Navara is white. Fabiano and Caruana is black. Okay, yeah, it's about pawn mobility here. a5. Wow. It threatens the crushing a takes if this is unchallenged. Pawn's going to get to the 7th. Black's virtually, you know, kind of forced to take this. But giving the trump card, the new trump card, and note if it gets to c6, we're using the pin piece. So c5 threatening now c6. Difficult for black to defend this here. King d8. But even here, there's some remarkable subtlety about this position, because I think many of us would just go charging in with c6, right? That was the whole point of the brilliant a5. C6 is one of the stronger moves, but even stronger it seems is what was played, H5. Just keeping C6 in reserve and asking black to do something constructive here. Is it a sort of zugzwangy sort of position? If F4, we can put our king in there, that's one thing. Because we've held actually the G6 square with H5. That's really naughty. This is another trump card which H5 creates, the king being so aggressive in this line. Yeah, H5 is a very, very naughty move to support king D6 without rook G6. In fact, that's so subtle I only noticed it now, and I've played through this game before. That's hot off the press insight. I've just noticed now. What on earth is the point of H5? The king actually wants to dig in to D6. And it does that now. In uninterrupted, goes to D6. So we're threatening rook takes D7 check and also C6. Bishop C8. Caruana is unfortunately in a bad position where when you have opposition, it's like having a virtual mating net. Nearly, you've cut off some of the escape squares. C6 here, rook G5, and in this position, it's winning for white. But the most incisive move was played, which is really neat. Shall I let you guess the last move of the game? White play here. So this is at move 55. What does white play in this position? White play. Yeah, I hope some of you have guessed it. Do you want more time? Any other guesses? Well, I think it's been mentioned. Bishop F7. We cut off this escape square. Weaving a mating net. We're weaving a mating net when we cut off escape squares. We started our weaving with king D6 with the opposition. And carrying on the weaving. And all we need now is a check, because this escape square is already cut off. All we need is this C7 checkmate. It'll be. What can black do here? This bishop, if it moves, well, black resigns. If the bishop moves, then check, driving the bishop back to stop the escape square. And our king is helping that mating net. And we just play C7 checkmate. A nice finish in these variations. But black resigns here. The computer is suggesting to delay things, try and delay things with rook c5. Well, we can just take the rook. It's a bit hopeless, isn't it? But that's one of the computer suggestions, or the rook. Yeah. Now, so that was fascinating, because look at how ruthless white is in generating the trump cards, which, maybe we would have been a bit greedy earlier. Well, not here, because the rook's covering c6. Sorry, we'd try and be a bit greedy maybe ourselves for c6, but this is such a stronger idea to get the king to d6. So this h5 instead of c6, such crushing stuff, because you're weaving and mating that around the king here. Isn't it so crushing? h5 is technically, yes, much stronger than c6 according to the engines. David Navara plays really, like a computer sometimes, and maybe that's a bit of an insult. I don't know. In our age, it's not an insult, because if you said that in 1980, it would be an insult. But the computers are so strong and dynamic now, it's not an insult now, I think. But this was the dynamic, aggressive way to play the position. He played it. Okay, so I hope those two games were much more interesting than last week's games. I thought they were. Did you? These two were much more interesting than last week's, wasn't it? I felt the excitement. I hope you did. So I hope you have a good week of chess. And if you did like this session this week, please do like the video, yeah? Remember to like the video. Likes are all appreciated. So I hope you got something out of these two games. Both, I think, you know, it shows if you want to win at chess, be bold, you know, dynamic, aggressive, take risks, no risk, no gain, you know, in chess. So even the most, you know, solid defenses can be broken down, like the Berlin, or in this game, this, whatever this was, this kind of Nimzo Indian system for black. Yeah, dynamic play. Okay, so see you next week. Have a good week. Thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube.